Hey, hey, what's up, everybody? It's your girl, Tori Grace, and it is another episode of Woman Crush Wednesdays. You guys know how we do. We are on the road again, headed towards the day's destination. So today's episode, we're going to talk about breakdowns in communication and what or how you can solve them. So, it's the beginning of the year, of course, obviously. Happy New Year to everybody. Um, I want to talk about communication. Um, what to do when the other person is not receiving what you are saying and how to handle that. Um, it's really difficult, honestly, when you're expressing yourself and you use the I feel and I said, which is normally what you're taught during like a therapy session on how to communicate with someone, is how to use the I feel when you. Um, and I don't think people are always understanding what that means when the I feel when you do X, Y, and Z. Uh, it's like they intentionally don't hear that particular portion and just focus on the ending part. They are listening to respond rather than listening to understand or listening to comprehend. And it makes communication difficult. Um, I know sometimes you can use like writing down stuff on how you feel to try to express to them, or a text message, but sometimes text messaging isn't always that great because you read with the person's inflection rather than reading with the person's intention. So it's a little confusing. Um, Communication breakdowns typically happen when there's either no communication at all or the communication is extremely one-sided. Uh, Communication is very much so a mature person's thing. Children communicate from the time that they're born. You get a cry for hungry, a cry for I'm wet, a cry for I'm sleepy, a cry for I'm just annoyed and irritated. And it's our duty to decipher and figure out what those cries mean. But once we do, that baby's cry always sounds the same for whatever the baby's crying for. So you don't really have to worry about sorting that once you kind of catch hold on to that. Well, communication is the exact same way. If I'm speaking to you and you do something that hurts and offends me, and I say, hey, you know what? I feel very unloved, or I feel disrespected, or I feel uncomfortable when you do, and then you insert whatever the topic is or whatever the subject matter is. It's very difficult for somebody to understand where you're coming from, or to receive what you're saying when you scream and yell. It's for me, I know when you're trying to express something to me, I don't do well with yelling. And that comes from a lot of trauma and childhood issues, which is something that's a constant work in progress for me. Because my father used to yell. That was his way of expressing, I don't like what you said. So what I've also noticed, unfortunately, because I have more relationships because I'm a lady, I've had more relationships with men in which the screaming and the yelling is how they, in essence, control the situation. They will scream and or yell when something is said that displeases them. And I'm not sure why that is done with them. It's something I've yet to figure out. So it's kind of like, okay, I don't understand what your issue is, or I don't want to hear what you're saying about my behavior is offensive. So instead of me hearing where you're coming from, I'm going to scream at you so that you can't be heard anymore, which in turn just frustrates and makes the situation worse than what it is. Growing up, that was kind of like the standard of, when I don't like what you say, I will yell. All my past relationships have been the exact same way. When I don't like what you say, I'm going to yell. I'm going to scream. And then the response was, I'm a man, and so this is why I'm doing it this way. I'm a man, so this is why I will handle the situation that way. What people fail to realize is that's abusive. Abuse goes clear across the board, whether it is verbal, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, and I could be missing some, but that's still abuse. When your significant other or even your child is expressing to you, hey, mom, dad, when you do these things, I don't feel safe. I don't feel comfortable. I feel like you're not hearing what I'm saying. I feel like you don't care about me when you do these things. It's your job to internalize that and then communicate back to them that that's not what you were trying to do, whether it's through your words or your actions. 9 times out of 10, your actions are going to speak louder than your words, which is why that phrase is there in the first place. People don't feel comfortable when you hold a conversation with them and then you say, hey, I understand what you're saying, but you continue to do that same behavior. My thing is, if you're incapable of changing that said behavior, then you need to communicate that with the person that you are dealing with. That I'm not willing to change this behavior. I'm not going to change this behavior. I know it's making you uncomfortable. However, but in most cases, which would probably be a better situation, but I'm not going to change. Communication breakdowns happen on a regular basis. It could have been something in your relationship, your business partnership, something that made the situation go from being okay and cool to where it is no longer something that benefits both of you, whether it was just your partnership at work or even your spouse or, like I said, your significant other. When those things happen, I call it the sweep under the rug method. If you don't acknowledge that this behavior is what set the course to why this is breaking down, you're never going to be able to get over it because you're not dealing with the situation. You're sweeping the situation under the rug. Well, if you know that sweeping something under the rug, it's just going to continue to make a pile. There's going to start to be a lump of dirt under there. You're not going to ever get that cleaned out necessarily because you clean the space of where you could see it, but you didn't clean up the mess. So it's going to continue to sit there until you get a huge mound under your rug. So now you've got this thing that's hidden, but it's still there. You have to acknowledge, accept, and deal with. If something is going on, you have to say, okay, you know what? I need to try to change this behavior to make the situation better, or try to understand where the person's coming from. To say, well, I'm a woman and that's why I'm this way, or I'm a man and that's why I'm this way, that's unacceptable. That's the equivalent to saying, well, I'm an Aquarius and I do this because that's just how I am and you have to accept me for that. No, people don't have to just accept you for that. Being an adult is something that you should do on a regular basis, or being a compassionate human being. You have to be able to show empathy and sympathy when you're communicating with someone. If your spouse expresses to you, this made me feel uncomfortable when, you should accept and acknowledge, and don't expect your person to be a mind reader. If they're telling you, I'm not understanding or I don't know why this is, it is your responsibility to find the right words, the correct words to express to them why you feel a certain way or why you reacted in a certain manner. It's not okay to sit with your significant other, do something, and then not understand why they respond back to you in return, especially if they're trying to explain to you. I would feel like crap if my kid told me, hey, Mom, when you did this, it made me feel uncomfortable. And I continued to do that behavior that made my child feel uncomfortable. I don't ever want my child to feel uncomfortable because I'm supposed to be their safety net. I'm supposed to be who takes care of them. I'm supposed to make them feel safe. I'm the one that's supposed to go to bat for my kids. So if I'm not going to bat for my kids, who else is going to? It's kind of like you don't want somebody to make you feel like crap. So you're going to remove yourself from that situation. It's not fair to whoever that you're in the communication relationship with, because 9 times out of 10, your communication relationship is not just something that is you speak to them hi every day. Your communication relationship is a lot deeper than that. It is your child, it is your spouse, it is your friend, it is a sibling. And when you refuse to hear that, typically that is a sign of narcissism, or it's a sign that somebody is very incapable of communication skills, which is really frustrating, because you can watch that same person communicate with others and the communication is impeccable. So it could be other people are scared to communicate with that person. Other people don't want to communicate with that person. Other people just communicate with that person because it's something that they want from them that they're getting that they don't get from someone else. So they kind of tolerate and just deal with and accept their bad behavior. I know for our family, the reason why the communication with my father was accepted for such a long time was because my mother was married to him. Once the divorce happened, it was like, hey, Dad, I don't have to accept this bad behavior, this bad communication from you as an acceptable form of communication anymore. And yes, there are very much so acceptable forms of behavior that are existent out there. You do not have to tolerate yelling and screaming. You do not have to tolerate cursing. You do not have to tolerate, well, I'm just not going to talk to you today because I'm angry at something that you did. Those are all unacceptable forms of behavior. And my rule of thumb is, if I wouldn't let my child do it to me, then why would you allow your significant other to do it to you? Because that's the example that you're setting at the end of the day. If you have young children or you have children in general, if you set the standard of, when you do something that I'm disappointed in, I'm going to ignore you, and that's the set of behavior that you're going to start to accept from your child. And that in turn is going to be how you groom your child to grow up to communicate with others. So unless your child is wiser than their years to say, you know what, Mom and Dad didn't do the correct thing in communication with others, this is very unhealthy, let me not communicate with any other people like that, your child is in turn going to reflect exactly how you are. If you yell and you scream, if you slam things when you're communicating with others, that is going to be how your child behaves. I've yet to see different. I'm one of 6, and I see that those tendencies from both of my parents appear in myself and my siblings. We have yellers, we have screamers, and then depending on what your background is, like if you went into the military or you lived in a certain part of town or you dealt with certain types of people, that behavior starts to reflect back in your communication skills with others. There are lots of books out there about how to communicate. There are different types of communication on how to receive, respond, how to communicate. It's better to say, hey, you know what? I'm not understanding what you're trying to explain to me. And sometimes people have to take notes when they're communicating, and that's okay. So you want to just try to figure out your best method of understanding. And sometimes that does have to do with your learning skill, your learning ability. There are visual learners, which I know that's kind of difficult to have a visual learning form in a relationship in which you are like literally having an argument. I know some people do the pin in it method where we're arguing, but we're going to have to come back to this later because we're arguing and voices are raised. Some people will not communicate with their spouse at all when yelling happens. I'm one of those people that I try not to communicate when yelling happens because I in turn yell back and nothing is heard. Everything is lost in the sauce, for lack of better words. You can't talk to somebody when the yelling is happening because you feel unheard, you feel stressed out, you feel disappointed, you feel a lot of stuff when yelling happens. And again, if you don't want your kids communicating in that manner, why would you communicate with your spouse in that manner? And no excuse is okay for yelling at your significant other. You can't say, well, you're closest to me, and this is why I yell at you because I'm more disappointed. You can't say, Well, I said this to you 5 times, and because I'm saying it to you again, I'm I'm screaming at you because I'm hoping that you hear me this time. None of those things are okay. That's very childish type behavior. That's something a toddler who doesn't have enough words uses. And regardless of how old you are, by the time you're 7, you've learned at least 1,000 words, and you can thank that to sight words. And then, of course, kindergartners go through the whole feeling stage where they teach you what feelings and stuff are and what they mean. So you've got enough words by at least 5 years old to communicate effectively and efficiently with your significant other or child or coworker on how you feel without screaming or yelling or nagging. And nagging is also another form of communication that's really stressful. I know people forget stuff sometimes, but there's a difference between asking for something and then nagging for something to be done. I know a lot of the times they pair nagging with a wife, and I don't always necessarily believe that that's true. I feel like nagging can be done by both men and women, and sometimes the nag comes from the wife asking somebody repeatedly to do stuff. It's unfortunate. I don't know, which we'd have to ask a guy this, which would be a great topic of why do men and women function differently. But the communication of a wife asking a husband to do something, or significant other, we'll try to use significant other from this point forward. One significant asking the other significant other to do something, and in turn, it's, yeah, I'm going to get that done, but then it doesn't get done for days, weeks. Next thing you know, it's months down the road, and what you ask to be completed still hasn't been done. There's a fine line between reminding and nagging, and I know it's difficult as you're the person that's asking for the thing to be done repeatedly. It makes it very frustrating for you. And so, to me, the person that is on the receiving end of having supposed to have done that task, the reason why they flip it into, hey, you're nagging, hey, you're harassing me, is literally only because they chose to ignore what was needed to be done. They chose to play their video games. They chose to go hang out with their friends. They chose to just say, you know what? I know this particular thing needs to be completed, but I'm choosing to not do this and have a breakdown in our communication. I'm choosing to not handle this thing, and I know it's going to frustrate you, but I'm doing this on my own time. And then they forget about what needs to be taken care of, which is very frustrating. So that's another breakdown in communication. So how do you fix this? It, to me, would be better to say, you know what, let me write a list of things down that need to be accomplished, and I'm going to take an hour or 2 hours out of either this day or that day, and I'm going to knock out these things that I know my significant other needs to be completed. And that's for a woman too. Your husband could have asked, or your, again, significant other could have asked you, hey, would you iron my shirts? Would you wash this in the laundry for me? Would you do X, Y, and Z? And I know sometimes it's difficult when both partners are working full-time in a relationship to accomplish these things, but it's kind of stuff that you've taken on as your role in the relationship of what I'm going to handle and what you're going to handle. If you're the laundry washer, then by all means, yeah, try to do it in a timely manner. But if you're the person that's supposed to be picking up the trash and washing the car, you have to do those things in a timely manner, especially if you expect the other person to continue to function in the capacity in which they were in the beginning. When you start to slack off and break down in your daily task, you make the other person feel unappreciated and unaccepted. These are all types of communication. You want to communicate to that person that they are appreciated and that they are wanted and loved and cared about by reciprocating those behaviors that that person is doing, because that is communication. Communication is not always verbally. Communication is sometimes done through your physical actions. Like I said, actions speak louder than words. To communicate with that person, like, hey, I care about you. A post-it note on their lunchbox, or a text message during their phone, or to their phone during the day. Hey, I was thinking about you. I miss you. Those are all forms of communication that help keep the positivity in y'all's relationship by communicating these things. Losing that starts to make people feel just like they're a bump on the log on the side of the road, just sitting there. These are things that they were there in the beginning and then they change. And whatever changes it, somebody makes an excuse as to why I don't do this anymore. I don't do this because. I don't do that anymore because. Rather than finding out why it started to trickle off in the first place, it's usually because one person felt unappreciated, uncared for, unloved. If you go all day long without talking to your significant other and then you keep expecting them to keep up the same thing that was done in the beginning, you want them to keep sending the I love you text, the how's your day going text, but you've chosen to stop responding to them, you have to understand they stopped communicating with you because you stopped communicating with them. And that's something that's up to the person that started it to fix it. You can't have a breakdown in your communication and expect somebody to continue and maintain the communication relationship and you're not participating. That is baffling and mind-boggling to me, that you would stop communicating with somebody and then expect them to continue down that path. You would stop doing things for someone and you expect them to keep doing. That's a little bit off to me. That's unfair. And yeah, the whole statement of life isn't fair. Yes, we all get that and understand that. However, in your little box, in your relationship, in your world that you create with your family, whether that's with friends or not, communication is something that's important. Like, that shouldn't be something that you have to say, well, you're treating me like everyone else does. If I responded in the capacity of you're behaving the way that I've been treated by others before, a lot of relationships would break down sooner rather than later, which is why you communicate with, you communicate with the I feel like when you insert whatever. That's why you communicate in that manner. It's taught so that somebody can understand, and it's not just, don't do this anymore because I said so. Don't do this anymore because I don't like it. Don't do this anymore. No, that's not healthy at all. It's got to be a communication. And at some particular point in time, if somebody continues to do the same behavior over and over and over again, and then they use the give me a minute to adjust, let me transition, those are all key signs that it's not going to change. I've dealt with that before in the past, where there's no set timeline on, okay, we're going to transition from this phase to the next phase and give me 6 months to get this fixed. When they leave an open-ended transition in that capacity, that's their way of saying, okay, I can keep doing this because we didn't put a goal. We didn't put an end date on. It should never be okay to just leave that open like that. I know a lot of times people get stuck in that open-ended, I'm not ready to get married yet, so just give me time. And there's no goal on when the time is going to be ready, but you're doing all the marital things. You're living together, have a place together, got a dog together. You might even have kids together. Those are ways that people can extend out their bad behavior. And by being on the receiving end of that, you continue to allow it. They're communicating with you full-fledged, I'm not going to change. So at some particular point in time, you as the receiver of that communication have to put an end goal and timestamp on when you're going to stop dealing with said behaviors, because it's being said, hey, I don't feel that you are worth it. I don't feel that you are important enough for me to attempt to try to change this. And sometimes it is bad behaviors that have been there since childhood, which therapy is recommended to try to go to work through that type of behavior. And then other times that's just literally how the person is. They may just be a selfish individual that do not care about how you feel or how you see things, that whatever the situation was, to how you got to where you are, it's just how the situation is, that they are that person that's gonna not change why they do what they do when they do what they do. So I guess in essence, like, the communication, what I'm trying to say is it's a two-way street. You have to communicate with your significant other, your child, your coworker, without yelling, without animosity, without tension. Using the words, using descriptions, using just no yelling, for lack of better words. It's hard to communicate with yelling and screaming. It's hard to communicate with someone that is refusing to see where you're coming from. That goes for work, that goes for home, it goes for anywhere. If you're explaining to someone and they're taking everything that you're saying as complaining, that means that they're not trying to listen to what you're saying. They're not trying to, especially if they're not offering solutions. When solutions aren't offered, again, to me, that's just another sign of, hey, I don't value your space in my life. I don't value your presence here. So that's why I'm not going to change. At some particular point in time, you have to decide what's enough and what you've accepted and tolerated for a long time, which is why I always say to speak up in the beginning when you first see and notice that type of behavior. Because if you don't, you're just letting that person say, hey, you know what, this is okay behavior, and you reinforce it with whatever your responses are. Especially if they're not, hey, I don't feel comfortable when you do X, Y, and Z. If you've expressed that and they continue to do it, they don't care. And it doesn't matter what they try to tell you on the other end. That's just what it is. So at the end of the day, your communication, if you've expressed the I feel when, you're trying not to nag, you've given it a decent amount of time, you've put your own self timestamp on a change in behavior. And guys, it has to be something reasonable. It can't be, I don't like when you go out and you work late and you know the person's job is working out late and they got to work till 4 or 5 in the morning and you know that this is what their job is. That's not something that's acceptable. And it's got to be something of like, hey, you're drinking too much. I think we should try to work on this. And you try to timestamp on their drinking because you see that the drinking is not healthy and it's causing issues financially for you guys, and it's causing issues physically or mentally for you guys, especially if you have children involved. It's got to be something like that. It can't just be something super petty like, oh, I don't like your haircut, so you need to change it, or else. That, and ultimatums are also not good. Unless, like I said, you've put that timestamp on it and it was something that was agreed upon. Even if it wasn't agreed upon, if you put that timestamp on of, hey, I don't like you going out to the club till 2:30 in the morning every day and leaving me at home to deal with all the things at home, that's an okay timestamp to kind of be like, all right, this is not going to change. He hasn't changed or she hasn't changed, so I'm not doing this anymore. That's an okay type of ending fine line, because it wasn't really an ultimatum. You talked to the person, they didn't want to put an end goal on it. You put your own end goal on it and you're choosing to no longer deal with this type of behavior. That's okay, especially when you've communicated it. You can't just wake up tomorrow and be like, oh, well, I told you this 6 months ago and you didn't hear me the first time I said it, or you didn't hear me at all when I said it, so I'm just going to chop this off. That's also not good behavior, especially if you care about that person and you're trying to be in a relationship with them. That's not healthy. But you've been living together for 5 years and there's no sign of proposal anywhere, and you got 2 kids and you want to get married so that you can build towards a future with somebody, so that you're doing the marriage thing healthily. That, again, is one of those situations where you put a timestamp on it. The person doesn't want to timestamp it, so you timestamped it internally on what is going to be acceptable behavior for you. I don't really have much else to say about communication outside of that. It is, again, something difficult. It's something that you try to kind of manage and maintain. It's a two-way street. You have to do it without nagging, no screaming, no yelling. Try the I feel method. And again, like I said, if your significant other is just not hearing you, you can always try therapy. Try individual therapy first, followed by couples therapy after you kind of work, because it could be something that you're doing internally that is an issue because you have some kind of internal communication issues based on some trauma from before, whether it is a past relationship or childhood. Try those steps first. And if none of that works and you guys just can't get on the same page, more than likely it's because there's still a breakdown in communication and or someone is refusing to acknowledge and hear where you're coming from. So that is it for today on Woman Crush Wednesday. I hope y'all enjoyed the episode. Tune in for more episodes coming soon. And don't forget to follow me on Instagram and Twitter at I am Tori Grace, TORIGR, the number 8CE. And I will catch y'all again later. Peace.